Continuing to pay attention to the Old Testament prophets during our Advent season, we have a reading from Isaiah chapter 35, verse 1 through 10. The wilderness and the dry land shall be glad. The desert shall rejoice and blossom like the crocus. It shall blossom abundantly and rejoice with joy and singing. The glory of Lebanon shall be given to it, the majesty of Carmel and Sharon. They shall see the glory of the Lord, the majesty of our God. Strengthen the weak hands and make firm the feeble knees. Say to those who are fearful of heart, be strong, do not fear. Here is your God. He will come with vengeance, with terrible recompense. He will come and save you. Then the eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf unstopped, and the lame shall leap like a deer, and the tongue of the speechless sing for joy. For water shall break forth in the wilderness, and streams in the desert. The burning sand shall become a pool, and the thirsty ground springs of water. The haunt of jackals shall become a swamp. The grass shall become reeds and rushes. A highway shall be there, and it shall be called the Holy Way. The unclean shall not travel on it, but it shall be for God's people. No traveler, not even fools, shall go astray. No lion shall be there, nor shall any ravenous beast come upon it. It shall not be found there, but the redeemed shall walk there. And the ransomed of the Lord shall return and come to Zion with singing. Everlasting joy shall be upon their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, and sorrow and sighing shall flee away. So there's a series of adolescent fiction books called Lemony Snicket, a series of unfortunate events. If you don't read adolescent fiction or haven't seen the one movie on about it, you might not want to. Because in this series of unfortunate events, it traces three orphans as they overcome one disaster after another, but never crest above the toil and turmoil of struggle and difficulty. It just never, ever goes away. My librarian wife even hasn't read them all. They are just too depressing. Who wants to read about tragedy, another tragedy, turned into another tragedy? For most of us, this is not our life. We are not swallowed up in tragedy. But for many, many, the Lemony Snicket children's stories would be a pleasant dream. Allow me to depress us for a few moments with some sobering statistics as we think about joy of Christmas. Did you know that 4 million children have lost a parent in the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo? That 26 million are now orphans. Did you know 400,000 Syrians are believed to have been killed in their civil war? Did you know 1 million civilians have died in Iraq since we went to war there? Did you know there are, as of today, 14,006 gun deaths in America? And that each year more than 40,000 people will take their own lives. We can continue to talk about war, can't we? Especially on this Sunday, so close to Pearl Harbor Day, we remember the horrible cost of war. But certainly let's not stop at remembering all the lives lost, those precious lives lost 75 years ago. For the ravages of war continue. A fantastic, moving New York Times video report shares the tale of a Syrian reporter. He was moved by the circumstances facing his country as war broke out to forego a nursing degree that he was pursuing to share the stories of his people as a reporter. He talks stirringly about two great friends that served as his cameraman. Both lost their lives to bombs. One, a booby trap in their own apartment meant to assassinate them both. Both his legs were crushed, and painful rehabilitation in Turkey has allowed him once again to walk and to return to Syria and to his work. His city, Aleppo, is now on the verge of a massive invasion, and when it is conquered, it is expected reprisals against its citizens will be horrible. How dare we celebrate this Christmas? How dare we be happy, even think of joy, rejoicing in a world where there exists so much misery? This might make us, my friends, a bunch of jerks. However, celebrate we do, and with good reason. And celebrate is what Isaiah does here in these few verses. But how can he? How can he celebrate, we should ask? Honestly, it seems premature. If you look at the text in its place, things have not gone well for Israel. And the prophet, speaking for the Lord, reveals God's judgment on those who are to blame. And then God will make a way and a new start, a fresh beginning for the children of Israel, and there will be joy all around. This good news, and it is good news, seems out of place for what Israel is actually going through. As if God misplaced this text in the wrong chapter. In fact, many theologians think this passage had been spliced into the wrong sequence of Isaiah, that it's actually supposed to occur much later in the book when things are, in fact, going better. But here it is nonetheless. And whether by accident or design or purpose, we have a good word of joy to a people who don't have a whole lot to celebrate. And maybe that is exactly what they need. In her commentary on this text, a theologian by the name of Lundblad states that Isaiah places here a word out of place. She says, we see and hear the data every night on the news and every morning on the front page of the paper. And to that data of our own lives, we wait for test results, we mourn the death of loved ones, we wonder if we'll make it through another round of layoffs. We know the data all too well, and we long for a word out of place. She then goes to share the story told by the director of the Children's Defense Fund. Marian Wright Edelman, the founder and president of this fund, often speaks such a word out of place. She refuses to wait until the time is right and everyone is on her side. After the latest defeat of a gun control measure, she wrote, I woke up in the morning after the Senate vote thinking about Sojourner Truth, one of my role models, a brilliant and indomitable slave woman who could neither read nor write, but who was passionate enough about ending unjust slavery and second-class treatment of women. At the end of one of her anti-slavery talks in Ohio, a man came up to her and said, Old woman, do you think that your talk about slavery does any good? Do you suppose people care what you say? Well, I don't care any more of your talk than I do for the bite of a flea. Perhaps not, she responded, but the Lord willing, I'll keep you scratching. So maybe this is just the word we need. Regardless if we are ready for it or if we even want it, it might be before it's time, but the itch of it might be giving us something to scratch, reminding us of something to pay attention to. In a world where so much does seem wrong, where bus seatbelts are financial concerns, where racism and misogyny is trumped and tolerated as honesty, where policymakers make war on well-established science, denying human-caused climate change when already millions are suffering its effects. In a world where the desire for a fun time high at a party can lead to drug addictions that ruin families and lives and finance cartels and gangs that use every sort of violence to maintain power. In a world where hate crimes against minorities in America has actually increased. My God, we're growing more hateful. In a world where free speech is deemed more dangerous than freedom to care anything anywhere. In a world where health care for all is deemed unaffordable, but money will be found to buy more bombs. Where so many measurements indicate that we are not moving forward, but slipping backwards. To speak a word of joy in this moment, it might be comparable to attending a funeral for a friend who died way too young and wishing the bereaved a Merry Christmas. Like going to a family that lost their home in a recent wildfire and handing them a box of Christmas lights. And yet, Isaiah's words, here so out of place, indicate and reveal, perhaps even encourage us to pay attention, draw us away from the overwhelming sadness of it all so that we might pay attention to God's activity in it all. This might be something that Jesus asked, or was asked. He must have thought about it. Because when they came to him, John the Baptist's disciples, after John was arrested, went to John, the worst was happening. See, John the Baptist was locked out. When John the Baptist looked out in the world, and he saw all that was wrong, all that was ungodly, all the hurt and brokenness and sin and faithlessness, and he knew that it couldn't continue. He knew that the people needed to prepare themselves because there was no way in heaven a good and just and loving God was going to let this horror continue. And he called the people to prepare. He pointed out to them all that was bad and terrible and sad, and he proclaimed to them their sin and the sin of the world. And he told them they needed to cross over and be rebaptized through the river Jordan and be ready to start anew. And he was certain that righteous and fiery and fiery king was coming to usher in God's everlasting reign. And when his own suffering in prison grew as bad as it could get, he looked out at the world and he sent his disciples to Jesus asking, "Are you the one, or is there another?" And then look at the different perspective between Jesus and John, where John saw sin and horror and sadness when he looked out at the world. Jesus pointed to hope and compassion and love. To this question by John's disciples, Jesus responded, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk. Those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." Now, Jesus is no pie-in-the-sky theologian. He knows the reality of sin, and better than any knows the cost of sin, the penalty of it, the price needed to be paid for it. But that does not stop him from looking out at the world and seeing, amidst it all, God's victories. These victories, they might seem small, they might even seem insignificant in the face of the horror around, but like an annoying flea bite, they remind us that God is moving yet, and God will take the day. We might ask what Jesus means by that last line, "Blessed is the one who doesn't stumble on account of me." I can only guess that he means in the face of all that you see, the power and the principalities, the terror and the horror, the suffering, the darkness, I and my message and my activity, they might seem like such a small puff of fresh air in the face of a hurricane of bad things. You might wonder, is this the best that God can do? Is this God's great and wonderful plan? Is this the king? The one who heals a few, exercises a few, feeds a few, in a whole world of brokenness and suffering. How can I believe if that is all? How can I believe in God if that is the best God can do? We might remember that when we look out at the heavens at night and we see the burst of light that are the tiny stars so far away, we are amazed, aren't we? But let's not forget that there is between those bursts of light millions of light years of darkness. That indeed the mass of the darkness far outweighs that of the light. And so too it might even be of human history, darkness outweighing the light, but it is nonetheless, when viewed, beautiful. I suppose in modern history there is no greater darkness than the Holocaust. And so I leave you with a few testimonies about lights that are burning in the darkness. Here is an eyewitness account of a time when the Jews had to stand in line, and if they collapsed or fell, they would be beat or killed. Turning my face over to the right, I saw the unconscious body of Federweiss, propped up straight, squeezed tightly between the bodies of the two men in front and behind. The man in the rear held him up by his trousers, while the one in the front pushed his back on Federweiss's chest to prevent him from dropping. They kept these positions for quite a while until the SS were at a safe distance. Here is another told by a woman, Gerda Klein, about how Ilsa came back to her, turning away from me so that I could not see what she was doing. Ilsa dug into her pockets. "I have brought you a present," she announced triumphantly. There in a fresh leaf was one red, slightly mashed raspberry. Or of the prisoner who on her birthday received a green apple and a used toothbrush from which the bristles had been worn off at one end. Perhaps none speaks so eloquently and powerfully about that time and the light that shines in the darkness than Anne Frank, who wrote on July 15, 1944, "It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals, because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them, because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I simply can't build up my hopes on the foundation consisting of confusion, of misery, and of death. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder, which will destroy us too. I can feel the sufferings of millions, and yet, if I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come out all right. That this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, I must uphold my ideals, for perhaps the time will come when I shall be able to carry them out. In a commentary on this quote, Leonard Fine writes, "All that we can say for near certain is that her belief in human goodness, if indeed she retained it, would no longer have been the innocent view of a feisty 14-year-old. It would have been instead the stubborn view of one who has known the full scope of evil, whose flesh had been tattooed by tragedy, but who refused to substitute the part for the whole, who insisted instead on capturing the infinite complexity that is the human condition, good and evil, kindness and cruelty, the honey and the thorn." Yes, it is a dark world. And yes, there is great suffering. Yes, it can be hard to see where God's victories are taking place, where the kingdom of heaven is forcefully expanding. But there are indeed millions of bursts of light each and every day. Millions of great, wonderful, beautiful, and miraculous things that do light up the darkness. My friends, look for those lights and be one of those lights, because someone maybe near you needs you to be a light in their darkness, to give them joy. Listen to a word from God to you this morning.